I was originally going to title this video my top 10 desert island games, but I don't know if that's a common term or not. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and these are my top 10 desert island games. Or it would be that if I was calling it that, but like I said already, I don't know if that's a commonly used term. You see, in my head, in my scenario, I'm trapped in an island, not alone, or this would be my top 10 solo games, which is really a list I should do again. It's been a while since I did my last one, but I'm getting sidetracked. I'm trapped in Desert Island. I have my family. I have assorted friends. I don't know why, in my hypothetical imagination, I insist on trapping my family with me. I should really be wishing them well on their own, on the mainland somewhere, but I digress again. Still sidetracked. This happens a lot. I'm trapped on an island with people, with friends, with family, and I'm trying to pick 10 games, the only 10 games I will ever own. And to that end, I have specific criteria. You see, this is not my top 10 favorite games of all time, although there is definitely some overlap. I mean, Terraforming Mars is on this table because I'm not even trying to hide the fact that this is one of those games. But these are the games that if I could only ever own 10 games. And so it kind of picks upon my favorite games, but with specific nuances or differences as far as things I'm trying to achieve with this list. And those nuances or differences are the fact that A, I'm trying to ensure that I have a variety of player counts hit on. I want to make sure that I have good solo games, good 2-player games, good 3-4-player games, and perhaps a good party game or two, something that can be played at larger player counts, because I'm trying to encompass all the possible situations since I only own 10 games, and I don't know what else these heathens own. They're on a desert island, they probably own nothing at all. I want a high emphasis on solo play because I want to be able to play these games solo as well. So there's a lot of these games will have crossover that they are good at other player counts, but they are good solo as well. There's not a single game on this list that is exclusively solo. There are multiple games on this list that accommodate solo play. There are multiple games on this list that hit different player counts, that will hit, playing well solo, playing good with 2, also playing good with 8. The fact that a game can do that, that's a big deal. And then another factor is the fact that these games have to have high variability and lots of content because they are the only 10 games I own. So in many cases I chose games that I might rank lower than other games because they have so much content that I will not get bored of them anytime soon. Now in theory all games will run out, all games will eventually get boring, but my goal is to make these 10 games last as long as they possibly can, and in some cases I wonder if they would ever get boring. I specifically have 4 or 5 games on this list that just have an abundance of content that makes it so much easier to keep these games for a long time. Now the flip side of that is that this also means that I have very few Euros and none of the heavier, crunchier Euros that I tend to like. Games like Food Chain Magnate, games like Caverna, games like Anno 1800, Brass, Coimbra. These are all games that I find I like my Euros in infrequent doses. I like diving into them on a, here we go, I played Coimbra, and 6 months later goes by and I play Coimbra again. I find that when I dive into Euros too often, as once happened to me with Le Havre when it was one of my first games, I find that to a certain extent you find yourself in certain patterns of the optimal moves, the optimal ways to adjust it, and I'm not looking for all the comments on, what do you mean the optimal? It's all this, is all, whatever. There's lots of interactions, lots of reasons why they're still engaging. I personally find that as much as I love very many heavy Euro games, I like them if I'm playing them infrequently, which means none of those crunchier, heavier games have made their way into my top 10 Desert Island games. Or if I could only keep 10, that's the title we're going with. So, let's go ahead and dive into this. Let's go ahead and break through, well, not really break through, we just start going through this. And I'm ordering this not in any majorly specific way, but having a little bit of a mindset towards getting some of the things you might be expecting out of the way first. As usual, timestamps down below in case you want to jump to any relevant section. Starting off with Terraforming Mars, big bucks. This is all the content for Terraforming Mars. It's a game that plays great solo, and even though Ares Expedition has become my go-to for if I'm playing this game solo, it gives me most of the same experience, but in a shorter playtime, easier table, easier setup, all of that. I still love Terraforming Mars, I still love it solo, I still love it at 2, at 3, and if I'm on a desert island alone, or if it's my only 10th game, whatever it is, my only 10 games, then yes, I will play it at 4 players as well. Reluctantly, but I'll do so because I have less games. Terraforming Mars is one of my favorite, no, that's not one of my favorite, it's my favorite tableau build, it's my favorite engine building game as I put down cards, play cards, draft cards. Drafting is a huge way I play the game. And because it's one of only 10 games I own, I'll actually enjoy and use all the expansions. Some of the expansion modules that I don't typically use. I like Colonies, it's nice. I kind of like Turmoil, but I find it adds too much game time to the game. But I'll be able to use it and mix up my experience because I'm looking for that variability. So overall, Terraforming Mars, my #1 game of all time. That's not my #1 game of all time as of 2021. And one that I am it still very much makes my list for if I only own 10 games. There's a lot of content, there's a lot of replayability, it's a long game, it's a good title to have if you only own 10, or if I only own 10, at least. Number 2 is another game that's not really a surprise. Number 2 is Inish. Inish is a game that I debated putting on this list because Inish does not necessarily have the variability I would want from many of the other games you'll see on this list. Inish is very pure, it's very direct. The greatest variability comes from the Epic Tale cards, and even with the expansion, that's like 45 different cards. The rest of it is the same thing again and again, but Inish is so good at what it's doing that I can't imagine never playing Inish again. I can't imagine never diving back into this masterpiece. And there are games. Castle of Burgundy, not on this list. I love that game, but still didn't make this list. I'm concerned that if I play that game too much, the nature of the level of interaction you have versus what you're doing, I think it would get a little older for me if I'm constantly diving into it. I don't think that will ever happen to me with Inish. I think Inish is the safest area control game, the safest pure area control game as far as what this game gives me, even with, or especially with, the low variability. The opportunity for just becoming better and better at this game. Mastery in games is something I tend to be a little wary of because it can increase that gap between players, but we only own 10 games, so we're all going to have that increased gap. I love Inish. The area control is so slick. The 3 victory conditions, being chieftain over 6 territories, being chieftain over 6, having presence in 6 territories, having presence with 6 sanctuaries, or being chieftain over 6 clans, the rule of 6s, the 3 6s, 6 6 6, but you have to figure out how to win, how to maneuver, how to navigate, which cards to draft, when to block, when to geist, when to go ahead and migrate. All the actions you have, combined with the Epic Tale cards you'll play to get your advantage when you need them. Inish is brilliant, and it's so clean and amazing at what it's doing. I just can't imagine not owning this game. Number 9. That's number 9. Number 8. Number 8, again, not really a surprise necessarily, although it depends, because at this point, who knows which of my top 10 have made it here, but Cthulhu Death May Die is definitely one of the top 10 that have made it here. Now, this is the only Command game on this list, to save you some time. There's no Zombicide Black Plague, there's no Marvel Zombies. I don't have Marvel Zombies yet. Oh, and one other criteria is I tend to be very wary of putting newer games on a top 10 if I can only own 10 games list. As much as I love games like Cascadia, Mind Management, or many other newer games to me, Mythic Mischief, there's so many newer games out there, I find that I'm hesitant to say if I could only own 10, hey, this game I've been playing for a year, that's the one that will make the list. Maybe it will. Maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now, not this particular list. And so, Marvel Zombies is out, and Zombicide Black Plague, while as much as I love it, I like Cthulhu Death May Die more, so Cthulhu Death May Die is the game that will stick around. Cthulhu Death May Die has a ton of variability in the episodes I have. I do want more content from Command, definitely want more content, still looking for more content. I don't know if they're going to slap a Marvel IP on it. I hope they don't. I like the IP that currently exists, even though I don't actually like the Cthulhu IP in general. But Cthulhu Death May Die, every time I dive into it, I like it more. And that intro scenario, that beginning scenario that you're encased in fire, trying to survive, I must have played that intro scenario 10 plus times. Don't get me wrong, I have like 50 plus games of Cthulhu Death May Die under my belt, and I'm nowhere close to being tired of it. The character variability, the episode variability, the Elder God variability, the scenario variability, there's a ton of reasons to dive into this game again and again and again. And yet that intro scenario that I've played 10 plus times, if you said, hey Alex, I've never played Cthulhu Death May Die, can we play? I would teach it to you, I would set it up, I would dive straight into that intro scenario without a doubt in my mind. It is such a good game, and I don't get bored of it. Now, there are specific episodes I would try to avoid if I was playing this game again and again and again. Some episodes are good for 1 or 2 plays, other episodes are good for 5, 10, 15, 20 plays. I love Cthulhu Death May Die. It is absolutely ending up on an island alone with me. In this hypothetical, by the way, I choose exactly which games, fall off the ship with me. Maybe this is why my wife doesn't want to go on a cruise ship. Maybe because I keep talking about desert island games and my family being trapped alone with me on an island. I don't know why. Anyways, number 7. Number 7 is what I typically do when I talk about this game, which is I just bring the cover. Just the cover, because I'm not walking around with a trove chest anytime soon. This is Too Many Bones, or this is the faceplate, the cover, with a very nice little back as well, to the Too Many Bones trove chest. That game is stuck on a shelf. It is never coming down. It's just going to stay there on the shelf forever because it's one of the heaviest things to lift. The last time I took it off my shelf, I put it on my dining room table, and then just by moving it, it scratched the entire wood surface. That was not a fun day. But Too Many Bones is amazing. And not only is it amazing, it's highly, highly variable in terms of what it's doing. It plays well solo, plays well 2, plays well at 3, 4, like Terraforming Mars before. 4 is where I start to be a little skeptical. Cthulhu Death May Die, by the way, plays well at 1, 2, 3, and 4, so I'm good there. But again, we start getting a little into the cage of territory with 4. Don't worry, I have games that are good with 4, including Inish, which is best with 4 in my opinion. Although plays well at 5 too if you have the expansion, and I do have the expansion, and I will be counting that. Again, I'm trying to hit all the player counts I can. Supposedly it plays well at 2 as well. I haven't actually played it at 2, Although Professor Meg, when she was here doing her top 10 with Quacklope, she says she loves Inisha 2, so I'm very intrigued by that. But either way, we have this Too Many Bones over here, this Too Many Bones box, or the cover, and it gives you so much variability to the game. Like, one of the highest degrees of variability on this list, well, there's actually another game that might have just as much, if not more, variability. We'll talk about that soon. But Too Many Bones gives you different ways to play, different player counts, and a ton of depth to the experience. Every time you dive into a new character, it's an entirely new game, and it's an entirely new way to approach the core puzzle of the experience. There's so much content here that I think it's irresponsible that I have the content that I do, given how much I can currently dive into it, which is why it's good news that I'm ending up on an island alone somewhere, because that will actually give me the opportunity to fully engage. In fact, that's probably why the ship sunk, because I brought the trophy chest with me. That's probably what happened. This is my fault, isn't it? This is my fault. But yeah, Too Many Bones, the trophy chest. It's just so much content. It's such a good experience. You're building out your characters. Every character is its own little puzzle. So many scenarios you have. I have all the content for it. Hopefully my Unbreakable Pledge arrives before I get lost on a desert island alone, because I'd like to have even more content once it's one of my only 10 games. But I love this game. It is so good. It is so enjoyable. It is so rewarding. I should start doing film playthroughs on my channel. Maybe I'll throw them on Patreon or something. I don't know. I just want an excuse to dive into this even more. I like this game. It's such a good game. It is one of the bars I have for good solo content, good RPG content, good diversified experience. Characters, every time I play a character in a different game, that's modular, tiny little adjustments to the character, I think of Too Many Bones, and how every single character in this game is an entirely different puzzle, an entirely new experience. Such a good game. That $25 you pay for a new character, there's a reason you do. Not just the components, but the amount of design work and development that goes into that. Again, an entirely new game. This is not like buying 2 characters for Arcadia Quest and saying, hey, look at that, they each have a new ability. No, this is an entirely new experience every time you dive into it. My number 6 is another game, and number 6 and 5 are both other games that hit the same vein as Too Many Bones. My number 6 is Spirit Island. Spirit Island, and again, this is just some of the content. I have more content in a box behind me. Spirit Island is another game that plays really well solo, plays really well 2 players, plays really well at 3, and then once you start going above 3, it starts branching into the, hey, I'm willing to, but not necessarily my preferred player count. Spirit Island is another cooperative experience of repelling the invaders from the land, and you're doing so by taking advantage of one of these spirits, and you're using their specific powers as well. Now, while the spirits are not as much of a character deep dive as Too Many Bones are, they are still a ton of spirits, and each of them gives you a different puzzle as to how they develop, how they're stronger, how they're weaker, what they like doing, and therefore how you're going to continue to build your deck around it, because powers and abilities is the name of the game in Spirit Island, and like Too Many Bones, it's a game that I need to dive into more and should start doing film playthroughs just for the excuse to continue to dive in, to even try the expansion content, which I've been talking about for a year and a half now, about how I haven't dived into Branch and Claw, or Jagged Earth, or any of the content. I really need to sit down and play this game more. It is such a ridiculously good game. Now, unlike Too Many Bones, it doesn't have the weight class of Too Many Bones, and by weight class, I mean the physical weight of the box. This is actually pretty reasonable, and even if you add the second box, because it's 2 full boxes with all the content, it's still pretty reasonable, so it's not the thing that sunk the boat, but it is the reason I'm happy the boat sank. In a manner of speaking, that is. My wife's really not going to be happy with me on this one. Spirit Island. Such a good game. An incredible experience. I love this game. Although now, if I'm alone on a desert island, am I the settler? Am I the one who's being repelled? I'm not entirely sure how this one goes. My number 5, another game, falls into the same vein. I bundled these 3 together. My number 5, and I'm just bringing one box to the table here because, again, same problem. Too much content, but too much content is a good thing. We have Marvel Champions, the card game. In this case, I have the Sinister Motives expansion with me. I haven't even taken this out of Shrink yet because I have so much content that I don't need to. Like Too Many Bones, this is the other game that rivals Too Many Bones for the sheer amount of content I have and the perhaps degree of irresponsibility I have with the amount of content I have for a game that I am playing, but not as much as the content that I have. I love Marvel Champions. Every time I dive into it, it's another excuse to build out a deck, to have another good time, to try another boss, to try another encounter. I love this game. As you have your deck building, you could use pre-scripted decks. I like to build my own deck every single time. I deconstruct and build my deck every time I play. So I grab some cards, so to grab, the specific theme, I go with Justice or who knows what, start building out my deck, and then when the game's done, I put all the cards back. I don't keep the decks there. I keep building, rebuilding. That's the way I approach this game. So that's a fun little experience of just trying new things. It's not about mastery to me. It's about just trying trying new combinations, trying new characters, trying new villains, trying new cards that I can combine with them. Not necessarily at the degree of trying to get that perfect deck, just having different experiences every single time and trying different approaches with different characters. I love Marvel Champions. There's a ton of content here. There's expansion content, there's campaign content. There's so much stuff for this game that it's absolutely obnoxious in a good way. I don't need it all, but I do find myself getting it all, because the problem with these LCG stuff is if you don't get it when it comes out, there's always the chance that it goes out of print, which has happened many times, and those things become harder and harder to pick up. The good news is, in the case of some of them, they also just start reprinting them eventually down the road, and then you get the newer stuff, which is basically the same as the older stuff though, so I'm not really worried about losing out on that end. I love Marvel Champions. It's an incredible experience. It has a ton of variability. Again, not the same individual character variability you find from Too Many Bones. I'd say, in fact, just the opposite. The more I play this game, the more expansion content comes out, the more I find that they seem to be feeling a little bit less different and different. Now, I haven't played them all, so I'm not commenting on all of them. I'm saying that at a certain point, with the character design they use for this compared to the character design they use in Too Many Bones, in terms of character differences, it's Too Many Bones has the most, then Spirit Island, then Marvel Champions. But Marvel Champions rivals Too Many Bones for which one has the most content, plays well solo, plays well 2 players, reluctantly willing to play at 3 and reluctantly willing to play at 4. So the cap on this one is a little higher, but again, we're going to break away from that primarily solo content in a second. These 3 I just bundled together because they are just so content heavy. If I could only own 10 games, these would probably make the cut. My number 4, I'm up to right? 4? My number 4 is Arena the Contest. Arena the Contest is the game that I mentioned at the beginning, in which you can play this solo, you can play this 2-player, and it goes all the way up to an 8-player experience and accommodates 8 players well. Now, for 8 players, I really only have 2 things on this list that will hit that count, and the next one is, well, yeah, the next one's going to be the other one. But I find that when you get to higher player counts, there's a trade-off. I try thinking through other games. Do I want monikers? Do I want One Night Ultimate Werewolf? Do I want the Resistance? What other games that accommodate high player counts do I want in my theoretical, temporary collection of 10 games that I could only ever own 10? And the answer for most of them was they're not good enough. And I don't think I play 8 players enough for those to be my only 10 games. I love One Night Ultimate Werewolf. I love Resistance, or Quest is my newest version of it. I love some of these games that kind of give you an incredible experience at a higher player count, but it's usually not the default way I'm going to play, and usually the drop-off in game ranking for me compared to being accommodating to 8 players in most cases isn't worth it. But in the case of Arena the Contest, I'm able to kind of plug that gap. Now, granted, the very nature of Arena the Contest means those casual people who just want to sit down and play a game of just one, I don't even know if just one plays up to 8 players, those casual people who just want to play a game of monikers, they won't be willing to sit down for Arena the Contest. So I am inherently excluding some people with what I'm doing here, but that's fine. It is what it is. Sacrifices will be made, trade-offs will be made, but Arena the Contest accommodates solo, it accommodates 2 players, it accommodates anything up to 8 players, although once you go past 2, you're usually trying to do it in terms of even. So you want to have 2, 4, 6, 8, not really 3, 5, or 7 quite as much. You could, but not the ideal. Then again, if I only own 10 games, there are many things I will do that are not ideal. But Arena the Contest gives you 2 ways to play the game. It gives you a ton of cooperative content, and again, like some of these other games, I hope that I get my Terraforming Adventures pledge before I sync, because that would be very helpful as far as having a lot more cooperative content for the experience. But Arena the Contest, Terraforming Adventures, a ton of content, the Dragon Collection, there's so much content that again, I will never responsibly go through all of this unless I am stuck on a desert island alone. I do like the miniatures, I do like the bling, and now I can actually take advantage of it by playing these full games. But it gives you solo, you can play it solo, you can play it cooperatively, going through the campaign adventure that Terraforming Adventures gives you even more campaign content for the game, or you can play it as an arena mode, like it's called, Arena the Contest, which I believe was originally the default way that the game was meant to be played, but did not become the default way that the game was played, hence having an entire expansion content for Terraforming Adventures, and all the way they doubled down in the cooperative mode, but there is head-to-head as well. I wouldn't recommend playing the cooperative game at 8 players, but playing a head-to-head scenario at 8 players, where you each choose one of your characters, one of your classes, and your abilities and all that, and then trying to figure out how to cooperate in a 4 versus 4 team-up to take down their opponents is a lot of fun. I've played the 4-player, the 8-player head-to-head 4-player teams. I've played it and enjoyed it. And while it's not my default way to approach this game, it is still an incredibly satisfying 8-player experience. So between the content, the variable player counts, and just how good the game is, if I could only keep 10 games, Arena the Contest would make that list. Now, number 3 might be surprising to you, although it might not, because I do talk about this one a lot and talk about it very favorably, and this is Codenames Duet. Now, this is the other game that can accommodate 8 players, although I don't know if the box says so. It does. It says 2 or more. Good on them. They're focusing on the 2-player experience because that's the ideal way to play Codenames Duet. But the or more is because the same way you can play Codenames Duet the same way you can play Codenames as a team experience, you can play Codenames Duet as a team experience. You can have 15 people on the table playing it, 7 on one side, 8 on the other, all trying to chip in and lend their voice to what they think the other Spymaster is giving. Now, I specifically choose Codenames Duet over Codenames in this case because, again, stuck on an island, only 10 games, gotta make some choices, and I love playing this game with my wife. I need to have games I can play table with my wife, and while she does enjoy certain games on this list, including Spirit Island, including Cthulhu Death May Die, she really enjoys Cthulhu Death May Die. That's a great choice. She probably would be upset at me for leaving Castle of Burgundy off the list, but it is what it is. Codenames Duet is definitely being chosen primarily over Codenames because of the two-player ability to play it, and because of the fact that my wife and I love playing this game, but it gives us that ability to accommodate both the party game category. This is the only party game you're going to find on this list, although Cthulhu Death May Die has its moments, but this is the only party game you'll find on the list, and it accommodates that wide player count aspect. If I'm playing with 8 players and I have the choice, I'd love to have Codenames and Codenames Duet. Maybe I'll try to sneak a few Codenames clue cards into here, because honestly, the nice part is, if you have the Codenames clue cards, you can literally just have a few of them. I could probably make it on the sand. I could probably like do little designs in the sand to make this work as regular Codenames once you have the Codenames Duet. Maybe. I don't know. Point is, Codenames Duet is making the list. Codenames as a general concept, I love. It is my favorite party game to date. Every party game I've ever played that rivals Codenames does not actually eclipse Codenames. It comes close, but it does not beat Codenames, and so Codenames would be my party game and my high player count game if I could, if I only had 10 games. My number two is another game I love called Everdell. Everdell is one that I debated. I have the slipcover sleeve on this one. But Everdell is one that I debated. I was not sure if I wanted to include this one on the list because of the fact that it does fall a bit into that Euro category that I mentioned doesn't necessarily work as well when you're playing games again and again and again. The reason Everdell did make this list over games like Brass, over games like A Feast for Odin, over games like Le Havre, the reason it made the list is not necessarily because I believe it gives you a better Euro experience, but because I believe it gives you a better variable experience. I have all the expansion content for this game. There's so many different ways to dive into it, so many different cards, so many different engines going on. I think Everdell is fantastic at what it's doing, and it's highly variable because of the amount of expansion content. Again, I hope the collector's edition comes before I get lost on that island somewhere. But Everdell is fantastic, and it's so good. This worker placement, not really deck building, but worker placement hand management game as you try to figure out which buildings to place, which critters to put in those buildings. You only have 15 cards. You have to make everything work. When you add in the expansions, there's a ton more variability to an already fairly variable experience, giving you so many different ways to dive into the experience, from adding one versus the other, at combining them, or adding all the expansions all at once. I love Everdell. I do not play it enough, I know that, and this will give me the excuse and reason I need to dive into it. It's not. If this video makes it sound like I want to be on a desert island, I don't. I'm just saying there would be perks, like Everdell, and Terraforming Mars, and Arena of the Contest, and all these other games. I would be sad about the games that I didn't pick. There's games like Rurik, Castle of Burgundy, Blood Rage, so many great games, and Marvel Zombies, when it shows up, I'll be very sad about. Paid a lot in shipping for that one, so that'll be sad. But either way, that's Everdell, my number 2. My number 1 is perhaps the most surprising one. To me, it's the most surprising one, but I went through my games, I went through my top 100, I tried thinking through if I could only own 10, which games would be eligible for this list. My number 1 surprised me. No, I'm not going to title this video, my number 1 will surprise you. Maybe I'll throw it as a tagline, because it surprises me. My number 1 is Root. Root is my number 1 because Root is a game that gives you area control. It is not my favorite area control game. I prefer Kemet, I prefer Cyclades, I prefer Inish. Well, Inish is here, so it doesn't count. I prefer Blood Rage. I might prefer Ankh, but I think I actually prefer Root. You see, Root gives you a highly variable experience in terms of how good this game is and what it's trying to do, especially if you have all the content. I have 10 factions at this point. Is it 10? It's 4, 2, 2. I think it's 10. I have 10 unique factions in Root, and each one is highly asymmetric in the way they approach the game, which means if you're playing this 2, 4, 6 players, you can have a 6-player game at Root. It's not my ideal player count, but you could have a 6-player game at Root. This game is a ton of fun in terms of the different puzzles it gives you with the different ways you can combine the characters. I could play it solo. In fact, if this is one of the only 10 games that I own, I would finally dive into the various autonomous factions, maybe, or I might just play more of the other solo games here, because I have plenty of solo experiences, but especially at 2 players, at 3 players. Now that I have the Hirelings, Root definitely makes the cut at being a game I could play solo, would play 2, would play 3, would play 4, would play 5, reluctantly would consider 6. I am on an island alone, and so if 6 people want to play Root with me, or 5 people want to play Root with me, I'll play with those 5 people and have a 6-player experience. Root is just highly variable in the type of area control experience it gives me. Cyclades almost made the cut. I love that game. Kemet, I feel like Kemet and Blood Rage, as much as I love them, I almost feel like I've played them so much that I'm already starting to hit that I like to play you infrequently as opposed to frequently. But I'm always down for Cyclades. I'm always down for Inish. Cyclades, again, didn't make the cut, but it came close. And I'm always down for Root, especially when you consider I only own 10 games. And I think Root thrives when you're playing against people who know the factions. You're playing against people who know those specific games, who know exactly what they're doing, who know how to play them, who know the ins and outs, the nuances, how to take advantage of one faction versus the other, how to use different boards, how to use different landmarks, and now that they have the hirelings, how to use the different hirelings. Root is definitely a surprise for me as far as the games that make the cut. This is the last one I added to the list. I added the first 9 and I started going through all the rest, trying to figure out what else is eligible. I debated a lot of games, including Marvel United, because there's a whole lot of content for that game, and it's a game that I don't mind playing with my kids, which is a category that I have because I'm on an island alone. Flip side is I can teach my kids Cthulhu Death May Die. They'd probably appreciate that, and also they're going to grow up. Marvel United is always going to be a lighter game, so as much as I love that game, it doesn't make my top 10 games if I can only keep 10. And so that's it. These are my top 10 Desert Island games. The list of 10 games if I can only keep 10 games. Obviously, this list shifts and adjusts over time. There are always going to be changes, but I don't know how many of these would change. Many of these have been games that would be locked in a year ago, 2 years ago. Just the nature of having so much content and being so good at what they do makes them strong contenders for staying on this list in the future. There are games I could see leaving. Maybe Everdell could be knocked out by something else. Inish could be knocked out. I don't know. These are all amazing experiences, and I'm curious, if I revisit this list 2 years from now, I'm curious how different it would actually be. I kind of have a hard time imagining it would be different by more than 2 or 3 titles. But either way, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Let me know in the comments down below what your exclusive games are. Not your favorite, but if you could only have 10 games, if you could only have 5 games, pick a number. If you could only have 3 games, what would they be and why? And more interestingly, why are they different than your number 1 games? On this list, my top 10 list, I have Terraforming Mars, I have Inish, I have Cthulhu Death May Die, and I think I have Spirit Island. I have to double check where I left off with that. Which means I have 3 or 4 picks from my top 10, and the rest are already branching outside my top 10 because top 10, to me, is different than if I could only keep 10. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.